This is I Go Travel with Don Barnett. We're going to swing off the Alaska Highway for a short trip here and go and find out a little bit about the first pipeline ever built across the north, and was called the Canol. We will also look at the lives of the black soldiers who were there. The U.S. military was segregated into separate black and white regiments back then. And the black soldiers suffered from prejudice and discrimination. However, they also showed that they were capable of working as well as the whites, even though many had never seen snow or experienced the bitter cold of the north. We are in the middle of the Black Line, the Alaska Highway, near number 2 Whitehorse. Working our way north, we are a little more than an hour before Whitehorse. At the intersection with Highway 6, we saw these old junk cars. They looked to be about in the vintage of the 1940s, so we pulled off the highway to take a closer look at them and found quite a story. Then we saw this sign. Highway 6, leading to the northeast, was the Canol Road. The original and only route of the first oil pipeline built in the north. Canol stands for Canadian Oil. It was a pipeline built during the panic of World War II, fearing a Japanese invasion. In the top right of this map, you can see the Mackenzie River and the community of Norman Wells, which was the site of a 61 oil well field. Nearly 1,000 kilometers long, the pipeline ran to a hastily constructed refinery in Whitehorse. You can drive the gravel road today to the Northwest Territories border from the junction where we found the old vehicles. There is no road on the Northwest Territories side. It is only called the 380-kilometer Heritage Trail, but it is an unfriendly stretch of space. Bridges are out across the many rivers and creeks. It is in a total isolated wilderness area, and even many cyclists and backpackers have found it an insurmountable hurdle to try to get across. In many places, the forests have come back and overgrown parts of the original line and road space area. Construction of the Canol pipeline is a tale of engineering challenge and human hardship. This high bridge at nearby Johnson's Landing was built so up high so steamboats on the Yukon River could get underneath it. The bridge still stands today. The Alaska Highway and a series of Canadian-built airport strips called the Northwest Staging Route, and the Canol Pipeline were 3 projects built during World War II to protect northern Canada and Alaska from a feared Japanese invasion. This string of airports became the route of the Alaska Highway. They were far enough inland to be considered safe. Fear increased, though, when the Japanese congratulated the U.S. and Canada on completion of the Alaska Highway, saying it would make it much easier for their own troop movements once they had captured the area. In a cooperative effort, American flyers used these airstrips to fly military aircraft to waiting Russian pilots in Fairbanks, who then flew them to Russia in the war against invading Nazi Germany. These American flights also brought in a lot of illegal booze into the local communities along the route. A total of about 53,000 workers worked on the pipeline. At Camp Canol, the main construction site just out of Norman Wells, about 90,000 meals per month were served during the building. Work conditions and bitterly cold winter with tons of snow resulted in 28,000 contractors, about half of them, quitting before their 9-month contracts were even up. Trucks were run 24 hours a day to keep them from not starting in the cold. Airplane fuel often was replaced, or it rather replaced regular fuel because it didn't freeze up. Warmer underground water flowed onto roads, froze them, and made driving a disaster on the ice. On the other hand, rivers froze on the bottom first, pushing up mounds of ice that knocked out 24 bridges during that first winter. You know, the real story of both the pipeline and the Alaska Highway is the human story. All workers, black workers, white workers, both suffered extremely from the cold in the winter, and they suffered from mosquitoes in the summer. Oil stoves heated the tents and created a thick frost of insulation inside the tent. This was good, but then it melted later in the night or by the morning, creating a damp, cold, muddy mess. Nearly all of the knives and forks for eating were out of metal, and they had to be thawed. Otherwise, the frozen metal quickly stuck to a person's tongue and lips, creating extreme discomfort and even sores. Taking a bath was absolutely out of the question, and it was delayed until the following spring. Uninsulated leather boots caused frozen feet. Trigger fingers, the trigger finger holes in gloves had to be sewn up. Arm and head holes were cut in sleeping bags, and then the sleeping bags were worn as coats. Remember, many of these black soldiers were people who had come from the southern states like Louisiana and Georgia, and they had never seen snow or ice before, much alone knew how to counteract it. When possible, some of them would trade their food and money with some of the local First Nations people for warmer clothing. Black soldiers suffered additional prejudice and discrimination. They slept in tents, while whites slept in wooden barracks. Eating areas were separate. Toilets were separate. The black soldiers often were not allowed to even go into town or visit the native people in their communities. A few of them were even given lengthy prison sentences for refusing to ride in an open truck box for about 150 kilometers in temperatures that were minus 30 to minus 40 degrees below zero. Many of the men spent a lot of time singing and humming tunes, gambling, and playing horseshoes. Many had pets, for example, pet bears, squirrels, foxes, and birds. You know, just while I'm thinking of it, I can tell you a couple of stories about hauling supplies and work on that Canol pipeline. I met different people and talked with them. One fellow told me that he was standing in the camp one day, nobody else much around. He was beside, kind of at the edge of the camp in the bush, and these three people came along, and they were in a very heated argument. There was a black soldier and then two white soldiers. And they were really going at it, and they didn't even pay attention to him. He was a distance away. And they kind of pushed and forced that black soldier behind a shed that was nearby. And then he heard a pistol shot. And he says, I knew what happened. They shot that guy. He says, I just backed off into the bush and walked around to the other side of the camp through the bush and got out of there. But times were really tough and rough on the black soldiers. However, the American president at about that time and just after, whereas it took a while for it to come into effect, but he desegregated the American military. There were no longer separate black units and white units. So this integration was a step forward, but there were bad times. And just while I'm telling stories about the Canol pipeline, I talked to another fellow who was a cat skinner. And he drove those big cats pulling the big sleds of heavy equipment, and they pulled them across the ice on Great Slave Lake. And twice, he said, his caterpillar broke through the ice. He heard the crack, and he jumped off both times. And one time, no problem, he jumped far enough. It only took a second when that ice started to crack and that heavy weight, the bulldozer disappeared on down out of sight along with whatever wagons or sleds it was pulling. One time, the second time he jumped down, when the bulldozer went down, the ice went kind of down on an angle with it into the hole, into the water, and he jumped onto the angled ice and almost slid back into the water, but he scrambled and made it out of it. But there was no rescue services in those days, and he said it was a matter of seconds. You either lived or died in that situation. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about the pipeline, and hit the subscribe button, and we're going to bring you more. Adios for now.